Hello, hello. Welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk about the Beatles in all of our shows here. We have lots of tremendous guests that we welcome onto the show and some frequent guests as well. In fact, everybody on this channel is a frequent guest. And it's great to have them here with us this time out. I thought just for the fun of it, because lots of times Beatle fans talk about what they think is the best album that the Beatles ever made. We should do a show on that. In fact, I don't mind doing a few of them every now and then, because everybody has different opinions. And look, folks, there's no definitive answer here. There's no one album where you could say, without a doubt, this was their best album. But we're all opinionated here, let's face it. And I welcome all the different opinions and insights that all my guests have with me. And so why don't I just very quickly introduce my guests this time? You probably all know them by heart. We've got Tom Hunyady and Joe Mayo here, and they are my colleagues on the Talk More Talk, a Solo-Beatles Videocast every other Monday night on YouTube, where we talk all the time about the Beatles. And of course, Tom has his own podcast show with Danny Nichols called Two Legs, a Paul McCartney Podcast. That's all about Paul and his solo career. And we got Joe Mayo, who does his own, he's been doing it for 10 years, his own channel, Mean Mr. Mayo, where he talks about anything and everything in the music business. Lots of Beatle content and CDs, DVDs, movies, anything in the entertainment field. Does a Fab Gab show where you rate Beatle and solo Beatle albums by track, what you think are the best ones. You know, it's endless. Every single day, both Tom and Joe, I think, are on YouTube giving us something. And we've got Dylan Sevey with us, who's been on my channel quite frequently lately. And he's from Nashville, plays the drums, guitar, sings, writes music. And he does it really well. And he certainly knows his stuff when it comes to the Beatles, the group, and the solo careers. And then we have John Montagna with us. And I certainly hope that John comes back more often on this channel, because I love talking to him about the Beatles. He is a bass player, and he has worked with Alan Parsons in the past. He's been on Happy Together tours as being part of the band. He's a New York musician, always playing gigs. And if you go to the Fest for Beatle fans, you might remember that he has done bass clinics talking about Paul's work as a bass player, going through, well, recent one that I saw where he went through the Abbey Road album and Paul's amazing bass playing on that one. So, gentlemen, welcome all.
Hello, Ken. Hi.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Quite a motley crew we have here.
Yes. Hopefully I'll have much more motley crews. The motlier the better.
Motley the better.
I think less Motley Crue, the better, personally, but that's just my taste.
All right, so we're going to talk here about what we feel happens to be the Beatles' best album. And in a way, you can't lose talking about a subject like this, because even if all of us say the same album, which is unlikely, that's a powerful statement about that album. And if we all give different answers, it tells you how solid the Beatles catalog really is, from Please Please Me to Let It Be. The only criteria that I had when I approached these guys about this was that we're talking about the UK albums only. All right, so let's see, who should start this off? Usually, whenever I'm on Talk More Talk, between Tom and Joe, they're very frustrated if they're not the first ones.
Depends on the topic. Depends on the topic. I've never said that.
So why don't we start this time with Joe?
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, what can I say about Yellow Submarine? Oh, no, that was just a little joke, folks. No, just kidding. No, I thought I'd throw you off the track a little bit. You see me wearing a Revolver shirt. Remember, these are albums that we feel are the best, not necessarily our favorites, although if they go together, fine, you know. Right. But with me, I mean, I love all the Beatles stuff, but I'm an early Beatles guy. I prefer early albums. Probably my favorite Beatles album of all time is probably when I grew up with the U.S. Capitol Beatles' second album. believe it or not. From the UK, I'd probably go with a surprise to many Beatles fans. With the Beatles is probably my favorite as far as the early stuff. But if you're asking what you are, what do I consider to be the Beatles' best album? I'm going to go with, and I don't think I'm going to be the only one,
The
the
what?
Beatles' White Album.
Oh, okay.
The Beatles.
Okay.
Now, it's funny because, of course, as we know, it's not really a full Beatles album in the sense that they didn't always work together on every track. It's probably the least unified, maybe, of all the albums. But I always think that when I come across a fan, younger fan especially, saying, "What do you recommend?" Which happens from time to time. I want to get into the Beatles. What do you recommend? Well, I always start with like the One album or
Right.
the Red and the Blue albums. For somebody who really doesn't know the stuff. But if we're talking about just other albums, regular catalog studio albums, I'd probably go with the White Album. And the reason mainly is because of how much is on it, and not just the quantity, but also how versatile it is. I mean, I've said it before. I'll say it every time it comes up. Paul McCartney, I don't agree with everything the man says, but boy, when he nailed it with that comment about it's the bloody Beatles White Album, shut up. I mean, that was the best. That and when he told off the reporter about the LSD, those are my two favorite Paul moments, I think. But anyway, now I made some notes here just so I remember. I was going to wing it just by reading the contents here. However, I mean, look at this. I always call something street cred. Like I know when I was a kid, uh, as a teenager in the 70s, and like 70, I think 77 is when I discovered the White Album. I hadn't gotten to the later Beatles stuff. And I felt like, wow, they got some street cred stuff on there. I mean, you got Birthday and you got Helter Skelter, they're just like Kiss or anything like that. I'm thinking, eh, I think it's cooler because you got some heavy rockers on there. Birthday, Helter Skelter, Back in the USSR. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. Glass Onion, Your Blues, which I love, and it's a bluesy track, but a rocking out track. Then you got some soft rock, right? I Will, Dear Prudence. I'm just naming a few. Julia, Mother Nature's Son, Martha, My Dear. Paul, a little schmaltz, a little Fred Astaire, soft chew with Honey Pie. You got George really coming into his own, really as a great songwriter by now. I mean, you got While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Savoy Truffle, which I love so much, and it's one of my favorite tracks of all George's tracks. Piggies with social commentary, all right, and countryish stuff. Rocky Raccoon, all right. Then you go over Ringo. That's got his first song that he wrote that appears on an album. Don't Pass Me By. You got another song. I think I haven't really thought this out, but I think it's the only album with two Ringo tracks on it. Uh,
Lead
you got
vocals, yeah.
Good Night. So you got two Ringos. It's a double album.
Mhm.
So, but you got Good Nights. You got two Ringo tracks, which he wrote for Ringo, and he does it so beautifully and ends the album perfectly. And then, if you're into craziness, weirdness, just for the hell of it, you got Revolution 9, of course, just the tape loops and insanity that keep you wondering what are they thinking, what are they smoking, what are they inhaling. Wild Honey Pie, and Why Don't We Do It in the Road. To me, it's just outrageous. Kind of segues to me into other tracks. It's not so much that the people say, "Oh, come on, not everything they did was great." I mean, Wild Honey Pie. I mean, well, I don't think of that as a proper song. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's fun to have them in. I'd rather have them than not, you know.
Hmm.
And that's really pretty much. I mean, if anybody else is going to say the White Album, what else could you add? I guess hopefully you can. But there's so much on here to love. Something for everybody. It absolutely shows different sides of the Beatles, and it's a whole big smorgasbord. So
Hmm.
that's why I picked the Beatles, aka the White Album.
I'll tell you, Joe, I may not have much to say at the end of this show.
Uh-oh. That's what I was afraid could happen with this.
But seriously, I mean, for the reasons you stated, I think the Beatles went as far as they could go in branching out in so many different musical genres. But truth be told, I mean, Revolver and Sgt. Pepper are extremely varied in all the different songs that are on that album. But this took it to the extreme, to go from Helter Skelter to Honey Pie to Revolution Number 9, reggae and Obla Di Obla Da. But let me bring up a point here, since you raised it, because there are some people who always feel like the more Beatles on the record, the better it would be. And
not always the case.
Let me just finish. One of the things that influenced me about this album is that, and this wasn't the first time, you can go back to Yesterday if you want to, but there's a lot of songs on here that had one Beatle, two Beatles, three Beatles, and yet it's still the Beatles. So in many ways, I even, incorporate the solo music in my way of thinking, because it's still the three primary songwriters, whether you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 Beatles on it, it's still the Beatles,
It's still being released under the aegis of that collective.
The brand
I
name.
mean, to this day, like anytime one of them does something or the Estates issues anything, we all jump on it because they were in that group, right? And for many years, I mean, immediately following the breakup, anytime one of them did something, the other three got asked about it. They were always sort of linked together, even though by the time of the White Album, they were beginning to sort of really come into themselves as very unique talents, and somehow trying to contain that all into a cohesive whole was becoming more and more of a problem, which is why the White Album sounds the way it does. It's bursting at the seams of creativity.
But I love it for that reason, and the fact that it goes in so many different directions, and it doesn't matter whether you have a full band or you have one guy playing acoustic guitar and nothing else. It's still the Beatles. And then you also realize gradually as the group progressed that John and Paul weren't collaborating as much, and yet they're writing strong songs with and without each other. So, that was all going on within the Beatles while they were together anyway. So, yeah. How do you feel about, and we got to bring this up.
I know what it's going to be. Okay.
George Martin's statement that the White Album would have been better if it was just a single album.
No way.
He later retracted, by the way. But everybody brings this up all the time.
He did retract it, you said?
Sure he did. I remember.
Really? Oh, I didn't know he'd retract it.
I would love, I mean, you're arguing for a world with less Beatles music, which is, I mean, what kind of an argument is that? And, Joe, I think it's such a great choice. I thought you spoke really well on it just now. And yeah, I don't think anyone is mistaking, Wild Honey Pie for an amazing composition or everything. But to me, that's not the point of it. The point of it being everything that it is, the point of it being such a massive artistic statement, is that it's a part of the experience. I expect to hear Wild Honey Pie coming after Obla Di Obla Da and before Bungalow Bill, and I expect to hear that end of Bungalow Bill, that ayo, going right into All My Guitar Gem Weeps. It's an experience. It doesn't matter if every single song is on the same caliber or not. I think it's I know what George Martin was trying to say, but I think it's such a flawed argument. And
I think some of the other Beatles, was George maybe, or I don't know who, somebody I thought had said, yeah, we should have done one album or something. One thing I want to add, not everything has to be so streamlined into perfection. The Beatles have all perfection, So you have one album that, and Paul also said that in that famous remark, which I agree with. I think that's one of the interesting things on it. There's so many different things, and it's kind of like it's a double album. The Beatles' only double album, when they were together. It has that novelty, and it's got some frayed edges here and there, and it's just anything goes. Different from the other albums in that regard, and sure, you could probably tighten it up, right, and just put certain tracks on there and make it just a typical single Beatle album. No.
That was the statement that they needed to make at that time, first of all. So I think, if you look at, I'm trying to come up with an example of an iconic piece of art that you say, like, yeah, this is good. You think you could maybe, change that, like how like on Seinfeld, does Kramer have to like walk in through the door really fast all the time? Do we have to do that? Like, no, that's what made it what it is, right? And as far as George Martin's remark is concerned, I think he's when they were making the album, he was probably, as the producer at EMI at the helm, going like, this is like a shit ton of material. We should really try and cipher this. This is like too much. We got to. And he was, but think of his perception, his perspective at the time. It was not yet the White Album that we all know and love for 50 years yet, right? We're coming at it with this history of ours. We all have our sense memories from when we were kids listening to that record, and the legend of the White Album has grown. From George Martin's perspective, it was like, I said it before and I'll say it now, we should have turned it into a single album, but people like it, so there it is. But no, the fact that it was the three or four of them just bursting with ideas that they could like barely contain, and it had to be 2 records. Like I think Electric Ladyland is a similar kind of thing, where it's just like a ton of stuff, and like, what do you do with all this? And that's you're actually like, the statement is like, we got so much stuff, we just cannot stop writing songs, and so the fact that it is a double, that's a statement in itself almost. So to say like, well, would it have made a single? I don't think we'd be talking about the same White Album 50 years later if they'd turned it into a single album.
There's material they left off too.
Oh yeah.
So
that's true.
How about the argument that it's overindulgent? Do they really have to do Revolution number 9? And I understand what you're saying about Wild Honey Pie, because to me that's kind of like a bridge going into Below Bill, and it serves its purpose that way. Maybe on its own, it's not a great work of art, but
I think Revolution 9 is a great work of art. I think your things we said today, co-host Alan Cozen has spoken on it many times, and he does a great job of breaking down why it's. I can understand why some people will enjoy it and some people won't enjoy it. I happen to, but I think it was a really bold and brave statement to put it on. Like you're saying, Ken. Doesn't matter if it's all 4 of us on this track or if it's just one of us. It's still the Beatles. It doesn't matter what genre it is. Like, we will put out an 8-minute. This collection of tape loops and so many other things going on, and that's the Beatles, and that's just as valid as anything else that we're doing, regardless of whether you like or appreciate experimental music or not. It serves its place, and the fact that they were brave enough to do that, I think, needs to be commended.
I'd rather have it than not on there too. I mean, it's not a track. I don't just go to play it. I never play it by itself, unless when I was younger, I'd say, you got to hear this. And I tell my friend to put the headphones just to play one track. But when I'm listening to the White Album, I got to play it all the way through. And then Good Night is so perfect after that. Kind of just like calm you down, settle yourself.
I'm always reminded of so many radio stations, FM stations, that ended their broadcast day at the end of the night, close to midnight, with Good Night.
Can I just say something about that song? And I'm just going to put this out into the universe, and I don't know if the man's ever going to hear it, but I just want to pose this question to the universe. Why doesn't Ringo close his shows with that song?
He avoids doing ballads.
Yeah.
If you the only top 10 single that Ringo had in the US that he's never done live is Only You. He stays away from the softer songs. It's the way it is.
I think it's a good choice myself.
If I went to see the All-Star Band and he started doing Only You, I'd probably start blubbering like a little kid, because I love that record, man. But I always thought like Good Night would be the perfect closing number for the All-Star Band show. Big Little Help from My Friends thing, and then everyone leaves, and it's just him and the piano player or something. You know, I think that would be a killer end to the show.
Tongue in cheek, maybe. I mean, you know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't have to be totally serious.
Well, no, and no, Ringo,
kind of bravado way.
No, Ringo is, what you see is what you get with that guy. He's incapable of doing anything. If he's going to do something that's like romantic and thing, it's going to be 100% sincere. You know what I mean? He puts his whole heart into it, whatever it is, whether he's singing the rocker or a country tune, or he's act naturally, whatever it is. What you see is what you get with him. He can't help but be 100% sincere about everything he does. That's what I love about him. He's not pretending. He's just incapable of putting on any sort of airs. I just thought like it's just the logical set closer, But,
I got one that I think is better.
Yeah.
You and Me, Babe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Goodbye to the audience.
Yeah.
Song.
That's true.
I mean, come on.
That's true.
You can thank the band members then,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a George composition, so it's a little tribute to him as well.
Yeah, Mal Evans.
George and Mal Evans, that's right. That's right.
So, and actually, Good Night is the only Beatles song that has Ringo on lead vocals that he's never done live, because he's done all the others.
All of his vocals from the Beatles, from the catalog, right?
Catalog.
Right, Octopus.
It's never done If You've Got Trouble.
Not for a catalog. I don't think that's likely to happen, Dylan.
It would happen before Good Night.
Probably.
By the way, Ken, thank you. This is one of those times where I wanted to go first. I'm like, I hope he picks me first.
Sometimes when I'm moderating Talk More Talk, it's like, I know Joe is itching to start.
Sometimes, yeah. Other times I get some ideas and bounce off the rest of you.
Yeah. All right, Tom, why don't we make you next?
All right, thank you. Yeah, speaking of the White Album, sometimes as great as it is, and I could have picked that. I could have picked, but there's 3 albums that I think is their best. And one could have been the White Album. One could have been Abbey Road for me. And then speaking of, White Album, for me, sometimes less is more. And as great as the White Album is, yeah, we still always come up with the single album version, and we put it in our playlist or whatever, and we all for some reason enjoy doing that. But well, you're not everybody, Ken. You're a different
Me either.
Not like everyone else.
Yeah. But again, less is more. And, and speaking of variety as well, I'm going with the album that I think started off with their, they're just going off and being experimental and all this and going in different directions. And that's, I'm going with Revolver.
Mm-hmm. And
I hope this makes sense, but for me, this is the most satisfying album of 3-minute or under songs that I've ever listened to. And the thing about these 3 minutes or less tracks is they feel longer. They feel just because they're so perfectly written. And they're so and the stories are so done, and every song is exactly the length it needs to be. Every song from top to bottom, I think, in my opinion, is perfect. And I'm taking away the fatigue factor, because Yellow Submarine I can do without it, these days. But you cannot deny the satisfaction you see when you introduce that to like a young child or a niece, a nephew, or whatever, and see the joy that they get when they first hear that song, and it's just amazing. But this is, again, I think every aspect of this album is perfect, production wise, mix wise, mono and stereo. I could go either way with this album. It expands the boundaries of what pop rock was at that time. You've got psychedelic rock in there. Maybe some people can argue progressive rock. You got world music in there. You got pop, a power pop, R&B, chamber music, electric music. I mean, the experimental side of this album is just, phenomenal. Acid rock, if you want to call it that for a genre, garage band, garage rock. There's just so much. Again, like the White Album, there's just so much going on with this album, but just less of it. But for me, it's better than the White Album, just because I think the songs are better written, and they're actually, I mean, all of them are together with this project, right? I mean, they're still working, very heavily as a band, coming up with ideas for each other, with whether it's George helping out with, Eleanor Rigby, or Paul coming in and playing solo for Taxman. You want to talk about social commentary? I mean, there you go, right there, Taxman. I mean, look at, the wealthy people are making, giving away 90% of their income, over 90% of their income to the Taxman there. But and then again, the artwork. I mean, how are you not drawn into this album just by looking, in my opinion, into the artwork? Yeah, I mean, the Beatles albums, all of them are almost great artworks, but for me, the illustrations with with them incorporating the photos in there, I just think that's maybe one of their best. I know, Sgt. Pepper's probably considered their most iconic album cover, but that's right up there with it, I think. And you talk about Joe, you talked about Harrison on that record. This is, I think, the real emergence of Harrison. You got 3 tracks, and then building on what he brought to Norwegian Wood, and then there's this great up-tempo, Indian influenced song, and Love You Too, just amazing. And then Taxman, like I said, and I Want to Tell You, just great stuff. Paul, and then this album, I think, is really where Paul just, I mean, he's an MFer, he's just amazing on this record. I mean, he's building up, Rubber Soul, and yeah, we got Yesterday, and Michelle is nice and stuff, and Rubber Soul, the stuff he did there. But on Revolver, I think he's emerged himself as a serious, writer, a serious storyteller, a serious melody maker. It just all comes in perfectly for Paul on this album. Not to say that John wasn't great on this album, because he is great. I mean, the work on Tomorrow Never Knows, I think, is just mind blowing. And even She Said, you got the little bit, with the backwards solos in there, the tape loops, for Tomorrow Never Knows. Oh, and then the R&B side of it with, Got to Get You Into My Life, it just, and Good Day Sunshine too. Again, all these different genres into this album that is 16 minutes on one side and 18 minutes on the other. You could have fit another 3 or 4 songs on there probably, but Eleanor Rigby, you listen to that song, it's 2 minutes long. You listen to it, I feel like I just read a 400-page book. It's just so well written. And you just love that story, and you just want it to keep going. For No One, again, 2-minute song, and you felt like you just watched a 90-minute 1950s Douglas Sirk melodrama film. It's just, again, great storytelling. So yeah, I mean, you got the influence of the LSD in there, but it's, for me, just a perfect, rock pop, just with all these other genres mixed in together. And it's probably the Beatles album I've listened to the most since 1986, when I became a real fan of the Beatles.
Okay.
Well said. That'd probably be my second pick, probably.
Anything you guys want to add?
I mean, Tom, that was extremely well said. Revolvers, an album that's also near and dear to my heart. And I think the reason why they might feel longer, than their actual length is, I just think musically too, they pack so much punch. Right. I mean, She Said, and Your Bird Can Sing in particular, the guitar work on those songs is absolutely stellar. George and Paul on And Your Bird Can Sing too. really doing an amazing job. And Paul and Ringo have their fair share of fantastic bass and drumming performances before Revolver, but between the emergence of Jeff Emmerich as the engineer for the first time, and then also them really, I mean, Rubber Soul was kind of the first time that they really tactfully put together a collection of songs as an album, but Revolver was really the first time that they really weren't thinking about, you know, we're going to write a bunch of songs that we're now going to go play live. So between the, you know, between them embracing the studio experimentation aspect of it, as well as the new young hotshot engineer, and then, like you said, all three main songwriters firing on all cylinders, it just
on
is
top of that, you got one of their greatest singles of all time, Paperback Writer and Rain, too. You know, all done, you know, with same sessions,
same
right?
sessions, absolutely fantastic.
One thing about Eleanor Rigby, I just want to say, when I was, I say a kid again, I'm going to say 13, around 13, I think, I bought the 45 of Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby. And I say, at this point, I pretty much went up to like Rubber Soul. I hadn't gone really much past that. And I had the Capital, what is it, orange and red, like a Target 45 with the label on it. And I played Eleanor Rigby. It was the first time I think I really was hearing that over and over and over and over. And it was so amazing to even a 13-year-old, a 12 or 13-year-old. It blew me away, even at that age. It was so powerful. Now, today, Tom and I especially often joke, and I think you mentioned it, about fatigue factor. I mean, there's so many songs. Like, I watched Paul in concert. I'm like, I hope he doesn't do Eleanor Rigby.
Oh yeah, right.
Which is like unthinkable.
But it's different than the album composition. I mean, you listen to that string quartet during, while he's singing all the lonely people. You know, he doesn't duplicate that. And you know, I think if it was more, you know, true to the finished product, I think maybe we wouldn't get fatigued. I don't know, but I feel the same way too. Yeah.
No, but I guess to finish it up, what I even mean the studio version too, as much as great a classic as it is, I don't know why these days I don't get as
it's not as powerful maybe. Yeah, right.
But I always try, for purposes like this, to give my opinion. I go back to the first listens of how I really was affected by it.
Right.
Without being, a kind of like, a little tired of it. So that's what I throw that in.
Joe, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think we're forgetting what Eleanor Rigby must have sounded like to people who bringing this album home for the first time when it came out. Yeah. The new Beatles record. Okay, is a rock tune, and then, I mean, I know you guys are all fatigued on it, but every single time that when that comes in, it's startling, like every time. And I think it's like okay, we got it. There's strings, we got it, fine. But I mean, just the way that thing jumps out at you, like every single time, it just grabs you. And I also feel like, Tom, you brought up the point about, McCartney his songwriting gift really blossoming in that. And I think, I'm noticing behind you, you've got a Give My Regards to Broad Street item of some kind. Yeah. And it occurred to me that almost all of the Beatles remakes in Broad Street
were from Revolver.
Were from Here, Then, Everywhere.
For No One.
Good Day, Sunshine, For No One. And Eleanor Rigby, he does like an extended thing. He does like a tone poem called Eleanor's Dream, which is actually brilliant. And so those songs and that period must resonate for him for some reason. That he chose those songs. I've also gone on record as saying that my favorite version of Long and Winding Road is the Broad Street version, but that's a whole other... That's another argument for another time.
Well, you look at the time.
I just figured in case anybody wasn't paying attention. It is an opinion.
Exactly.
Yes,
that is.
But anyway, be that as it may. So I think there was something special going on there, for sure. And I think we can't. I'm Joe. I'm glad you brought that up. That we can't forget the impact that all this stuff had initially. We're used to it now because it's a part of history.
And that's what I based my bold move. Right, and that's what I based my pick on. I mean, I took that fatigue factor away, and I was like, this is it for me.
Yeah,
great pick.
I would definitely like to point out that on things we said today, we just did a show on Revolver, and we covered a lot of bases on that album. But for someone like myself, who was a little kid while the album came out, and I was getting all the Beatles albums chronologically, the American albums, but I couldn't possibly experience it the same way that an older person or a teenager would have. But to me, all these big changes the Beatles were making with Tomorrow Never Knows or Rain, I don't think it affected me as a little kid. Later on, you realize jump they were taking, but everything really changed for me as someone who was brought up on the American albums once the CDs came out in 1987, and you were brought up on. They put out the UK albums, and what a difference between Rubber Soul going into Revolver. And I always like to bring up in the Beatles anthology when George Harrison said, to me, there wasn't that big a difference between. It's like he thought Revolver was Rubber Soul Part 2. And it's like, Jesus, are you listening to the same album here? I mean, the Beatles were expanding in so many ways with all these different musical genres to go, like you said, Joe, to go from Norwegian Wood with a sitar, a folk song with sitar, into something full blown like Love You Too. What an advancement like that. And I always like to point out how young the Beatles were when they accomplished all this stuff. George Harrison was 23 when he wrote Love You Too, or 24 with Without You, something so advanced like that. And then you're talking about all the experimentation with Tomorrow Never Knows and She Said and backwards bits and Rain and all that. And they were all so young when all this was going on. And I love what you said, Tom, about Paul's songs, that they say so much in just 2 minutes. For No One tells a whole story in very few words in 2 minutes. And it's so brilliant to be able to do all that so economically, just like with Eleanor Rigby. And Paul has pointed out a few times that Here, There, and Everywhere could be his favorite song of all the ones he's so, but Revolver is such a stunning piece of work to me. And I think one of the reasons why is because if you look at this transition from Rubber Soul to Revolver, it's like night and day. They're two very different bands. Yes, they're similar. We know the vocals are very much the same, and it's a very bandy album with guitars and drums and bass, and it's not multi-layered like Sgt. Pepper was to become. And I think that's part of the reason why it stands out today, because it sounds so fresh, and a lot of the music that people want to hear in rock is more simple production, raw, the kind of drifting away from the Sgt. Pepper type albums, which also explains why the White Album is very popular, because it's going back to basics after Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour. But anyway, I digress. All right, very good, Tom. John, you're next.
Okay, well, I'm glad. First of all, I'm very grateful that you have invited me and all of us onto this discussion, but I think it's important that we acknowledge ultimately the futility of this exercise, in the sense that, never mind all that stuff about how music and art are totally subjective and all that kind of thing, and people have different opinions. What's the criteria that we're using to determine what is the best album? Is it the quality of the songwriting? Is it the quality of the band performances? Is it some sort of continuity or a thematic thing? I was having this conversation with my wife Jill last night. She said, well, you could choose a different album based on any one of those criteria.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and I think there's also, we're in a time now where we're talking about 8 years of recording output, right? That has been evaluated and reevaluated over and over again throughout the generations. So I can remember in the 80s, it was just sort of a given that Pepper was the one, right? Like I seem to remember reading something about how EMI rushed the albums on CD. They rushed them out into the stores in time for the 20th anniversary of Pepper. Like, that's how important Pepper was. And there was a documentary about that album, and all the Rolling Stone lists. It was just an assumption that Pepper was the landmark achievement. And then a couple of years later, there was sort of like a backlash against that. And people said, no, Revolver's really the one where they blossomed into all that kind of business. And, you know, I'm reluctant always to say, you know, people ask me, so John, what's your favorite Beatles album? And if it's not someone like you all, like the experts, if it's a civilian and they say, like, you know, what's your favorite Beatles album? I dodge the question by saying English or American. And they go, huh? What? And then I go on a disquisition about how the English albums were different from the American records, and then they kind of just back away and leave me alone. But so I'm glad that you specified, Ken, the English stuff. So, and I'm always reluctant to say, well, this is the one, because that sort of also implies that the rest of them fall short somehow, right? So that's another delicate issue. And also, you know, to the point of the Beatles' mission statement, where they were constantly, everything they did was pushing themselves, beating themselves, taking everything to the next level all the time. I'm trying to remember who said, I think it was Duke Ellington who said that when someone asked him, like, what's your favorite piece of music that you've ever written? And he said, the next one.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we finished this record, it's done, on to the next thing. So to say what's the best Beatles album, everything that as soon as something was done, that's the best thing that they can do. I mean, you all saw Get Back, right? I'm hoping. Otherwise, you know, I don't know what the hell you've been doing since Thanksgiving. But, you know, why were they so reluctant to go out on stage? I'll go up on the roof and play. And I think Paul said, like, if we go out there and it's not like the greatest thing we've ever done, we can't present ourselves in a mediocre. We can't just go out and just like play a show and just have it be. It has to be like amazing. So they were constantly topping themselves. So all that to say, you know, for me, I took the opposite tack of the opposite thing of what Joe did. Where I kind of, you know, but what we consider the best versus what our favorite is, and I wound up kind of falling back on what I think is my favorite album, and I actually had a different one in mind initially, and then so here's what happened. So it ain't Abbey Road, it ain't the White Album, it ain't Pepper, right? I tend to go back to Revolver, and I say, yeah, that's the one. The surrealism is happening, and McCartney's melodic, all the things, Tom, that you talked about. And then something really strange happened. I put Revolver on 2 nights ago, and as the young people say these days, it just hit different. For some reason, I don't know why, it just sounded a little forced to me, a little mannered, a little like, okay, string quartet, hey, a French horn, okay, I get it. And it just seemed, for some reason, it just didn't. I don't know. Maybe it was the mood I was in that night. I don't know. But for some reason I was like, and maybe it has to do with our perception as being like, you know, geekazoids about this stuff, that we've heard it a million times. For whatever reason, it just didn't sound as fresh to me. So then I put on another album that's always been like a favorite of mine, and from start to finish I was like riveted, and it's the English Hard Day's Night.
Wow. Okay.
Nice. This is the Lennon and McCartney songwriting team, like that from when you start up a lawnmower and it just, I mean, they are just on fire. There is zero filler on this album. Every single track is a winner. There's not one song that you feel like we need one more. Let's what else have you got? And there's no scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's no like, we love the song Michelle, it's wonderful, but how did it come to be? Paul goes, hey John says, hey Paul, remember that little riff you used to do at the parties when we were, let's make that into something, right? We all know that they did a lot of that over the years. Just like, well, yeah, there was this riff I came up with like many years ago. Yeah, let's build that into something, right? There's none of that on Hard Day's Night. They are going like a machine on demand. I always felt like it was the first thing they did when they came back from America. And there had to be a sense of like, who the fuck's better than us? Who is better than us? I mean, they go, you're right. They go over to the United States. You know, they've England. They've done Europe, and they go over to America. Poof, they put everybody out of work. You know, my friend Godfrey Townsend, the guitarist, used to tour with a lot of doo-wop groups, and he told me like, man, those guys all hate the Beatles. Let me tell you, man, because like, you know, there was a point like after 1964, you know, that was it for a lot of people. You know. They go over there, they kill, and then they come back to England like the returning champions, and they go right into the studio and they cut this album in, what was it, like 4 days of studio time? I think George Martin said it was 65 hours of total recording time stretched out over however many, you know, 2 weeks or something like this. The rhythm section playing on this record, the drum of the engine of Ringo, McCartney, and John Lennon's right hand on that acoustic Gibson, right? Even the sort of like, you know, what the English would say twee numbers, like Anytime at All, which could have been handed off. I felt like that song could have been handed off like to Billy J. Kramer, and it would have been, you know, something like that. But if you listen to the rhythm section on that, it's rocking. It's slamming. There's like a forward motion to this album, right? Maybe it's because of the visual that I attached to like Hard Day's Night. That's the movie opens with them running in the street, and then they're in the train and all this kind of stuff. But there's an energy to this record that's their personality and their charm and their humor. I mean, we've all seen that movie a gajillion times, and every time we see it, we think the same thing. How cool would it be to be those guys? I mean, they were showing us, you know, how to be. They were showing the world like how, like another way of living and expressing yourself and being exactly who you are. And if you think about the demands that they made on this film, we're not making a shitty rock and roll film. We're going to make a cool record, right? I looked at this photo for about 20 minutes last night. I'm like, look at that. How cool is that? You know? So, and I think about, I don't know if you all saw, there was a documentary about the making of Hard Day's Night that came out on home video, Phil Collins. And so, and they had Walter Shenson in there. And I was thinking about what it must be like to be that guy's next door neighbor, hearing now those stories for 40 years at every dinner party. Like, you know, think about it. I got a hit song on demand. Yes, Walter, pass the sausages, please. But so apparently they had the script in place, they had the shooting schedule in place, and Shenson says like, okay, so now, all right, guys, so we need songs. And John or Paul or both of them said, well, what kind of songs do you want? And Shenson goes, you know, Beatles songs, right? Which is a kind of like a flippant remark. But if you think about it, I mean, this is like the raw material. This is like like you ever taste the difference between like Tropicana orange juice from concentrate and like fresh squeezed orange juice, like out of an orange? This is like out of the ground, the raw stuff that makes the Beatles what they still are today. All of their influences are on display here. The rockabilly, the country, the R&B. You've got the Shirelles bit on Tell Me Why. You've got on You Can't Do That. He's doing the Wilson Pickett vibe. How about side two? Like, oh, by the way, here's like an extra 6 songs that aren't in the movie but are just as good. Just because we need something to fill up side 2, and they fill it up with like I'll Cry Instead, Things We Said Today, just killer songwriting from beginning to end. And this is also the very, very beginning of the studio experimentation. They've got 4 tracks now, which is like a big time deal, right? So now they're adding some percussion, they're doing the vari-speed thing with the tape. Harrison's 12-string, right? He's practically inventing like the vocabulary of like rock guitar playing, right? From some of the leads, some of the inventiveness of the lead parts that he's coming up with musically and sonically, right? I made some notes here. So yeah, every single moment on this record is inspired. There's none of the fatigue of, Beatles for Sale, or like I was listening to the Help album recently, and I felt like by the second side there was starting to lag a little bit. All right, let's close out with Dizzy Miss Lizzy so we won't get the hell out of here. Right? There's none of that. They are just like a rocket launcher, right? So and then I realized my favorite American album is the Hey Jude album.
Great.
And what does the Hey Jude album open with? Can't Buy Me Love and Should Have Known Better, right? So yeah. I've always had a thing for this record. I particularly like the stereo mix. There's a lot of air to it, and it's not like everything in one channel, bass and tambourine on the other channel, like some of the stereo mixes are. But yeah, it's like the raw material out of the ground of what we think of the Beatles to be. So
what was the lady said with the painting? It's like a flower sprouting from the ground.
Yeah, that woman. Oh man. Yeah. Well, Godfrey showed us that on the tour bus one night, and for like 2 weeks where everything was, anytime we answered a question, we'd go with, well, what would you say if you met Paul? Well, I would tell him. And we were going, well, for weeks.
Because they know somebody.
Right. But yeah, well, think of that girl. Think of the how inspired she was to paint that thing and then go to the concert and hang around outside. That kind of like fervor, that evangelical, like, people don't do that for rock bands anymore. Nobody hangs around outside of, I don't know, name. We love Imagine Dragons. I'm sure they're great. No one's hanging around outside Forest Hill Stadium, with paintings of them. We've been out here for 2 hours. We didn't even get to see them. Like, bands don't do that to people anymore, right? Think about like when these guys appeared and the emotion that and inspiration. This is the raw material. This is the iron ore, or whatever I'll sit here coming up with bad analogies all night. So I think I'm just gonna just leave it at that.
I just feel curious as to what Dylan. Dylan, you were like a couple of times when John was talking, I noticed you go like that. Because I want to bounce off into that too.
Well, before I say that, I want to say I adore so much that you chose this album. I kind of intrinsically have an issue with labeling anything as early or late or mid or whatever, but if we're going off of the sort of the accepted definitions of it, Hard Day's Night for me is so easily the best of them for everything that you said. And I feel like a big reason why that energy is there, and I never really thought about this till you mentioned it, they just come back from America. I love Please Please Me, and I love With the Beatles. But there's moments on those records where I feel like they're still a little contained, but now they've been playing all these shows where they're being forced to play louder because the crowds are bigger and they can barely hear themselves. You're right. There is an energy to that record that I think they approached that record with the same energy that they had to approach their live shows, which I don't know why they didn't really do that, in my opinion, with Please Please Me with the Beatles, given how crazy those cavern gigs were and the Hamburg gigs were. Like, there's times where, as much as I love those records, where their performances almost feel a little safe or a little tailored to the studio.
They're probably still intimidated by the fact that they were,
of course,
they were in EMI studios making a record. They weren't as experienced. By the time they get to doing the Hard Day's Night album, this recording studio, they had been at it for 2 years already. They've been doing this, and
they've absolutely. I mean, John wrote 10 of the 13 songs. I think he wrote "Happy Just to Dance with You," which obviously George sang, but I'm pretty sure John wrote it. And then Paul has 3 songs, but all 3 of them, I mean, Things We Said Today is always been one of my favorites. In the movie. It should have been. The only thing, the only thing, Joe, when I was making that face, I don't dislike any song on the record whatsoever. My only thing is, you were saying every single song is perfect, and I thought, I don't think When I Get Home is perfect.
I was waiting for it. I
like now Ringo crush, bum 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 bum,
right?
Incredible. I like that song.
I thought of I have to agree with you on that, but they still turn it into something.
Absolutely, which is what they always did.
It's a great record. Yeah, the bridge was sort of like, oh, I got to write a bridge. Okay, But even so, like their weakest track
is still great.
Guys, I got to say, I got itching here to say it, because every time you probably encounter it too, when there's like a list of like the worst, as if anything existed, Beatles songs or least Beatles songs. When I Get Home is always on there. A lot, 9 times out of 10, and I think it's that line that people say till the cows come home, which was an old expression. John is operating really mightily. His vocals are great. He's really intense, as he usually could be. The guitar, I love the guitar. Ringo, whoa,
right.
I love those crashes. I don't understand what's not to love about that. But hey, everybody's different. Right?
I think if I can venture a guess, I think when you hold it up next to Things We Said Today, and you hold it up next to, Eleanor Rigby or Paperback Writer, or stuff where in terms of, or any other song where there's like a perfect rhyming scheme, perfect economy and cleverness of this is R&B.
Triviality's a good rhyme.
Well, yeah, exactly. If you please, I got no time for triviality. They were knocking out an R&B, Chuck Berry, all those R&B records and all those obscure, Larry Williams and all those black acts that they were listening to, that some of us had never heard before until the Beatles turned us on to them. They were knocking out an R&B track. It reflects their roots as an R&B band to me. So I'll forgive them the sort of like, okay, so it's not up to like, I'll give it an 87 instead of 100. Okay, but still, it's like it's a relentless rock and roll tune, right? Yeah. I can't say the same thing for You Like Me Too Much or Tell Me What You See, right? I listened to the English Help album in the car recently, and I really felt like by side 2 they were like...
That's why the Beatles' U.S. albums are so good. The second side of Help is a mess.
Right, and that's why Beatles 6 is my least favorite American LP, because they siphoned off like the weak tracks on the Help album. I was cracking myself up in the car. Tell Me What You See. I see a song that was written over like in 15 minutes because they needed another song. You Like Me Too Much. I'm making myself laugh. No. You Like Me Too Much. I don't like that song too much.
I feel bad that the Revolver didn't hit you.
It was a curious thing, man. It was the weirdest. I just felt like, really, French horn? Okay. Like that was just my natural response at that moment. And I don't know why. I'll have to like think on that for a minute. Maybe because there's another phenomenon that I've noticed. Tell me if you've noticed, like when you get a greatest hits collection of any band from the 60s, right? and they sequence their songs chronologically, right? There's always that moment. There's always that song where you can tell, the band got a copy of Revolver, and now they're doing, like years ago I did some work with Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders, and he hooked me up with the 3-disc Sony, Raiders collection, right? And the whole record is American rock and roll, right? For like, a disc and a half, and then all of a sudden there's ding 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 ding, these strings and these, like, I see what happened here. Like every
Revolver moment.
Every band in the '60s has that moment where they, everything's backwards and there's, they're singing through, funnels. And so I don't know, for whatever reason, it just felt at that moment it didn't hit me with the same sort of purity. Like as much as we all ignite, and I love that record, and I some incredible bass lines, some incredible songwriting from beginning to end, but for some reason it just didn't feel as I don't know. Hard Day's Night there's a purity and an innocence to this. Again, coming off of the American stuff, and they're making a movie, but they're still, they've. It just captures everything about, like, the essence of everything about them, to me.
Can I say one thing about I'll Cry Instead before I forget? I'll Cry Instead. I'm a big John fan. I'll Cry Instead is one of my least favorite Beatle John songs, and I think it's really more maybe the tune. It seems like a kind of more rushed song to me, but I like the fact that what John's talking about in the song is more personal, talking about the chip on his shoulder. I like the subject matter that he's willing to share. I just don't think I think the song itself is great, but it's interesting for me to note that in the original UK version is the shorter version of I'll Cry Instead. Right. Another reason why I like the United Artists album on the US and stuff, and I think the single as well in the US, it has another verse where he sings the same verse over, but it's not, if you listen, it's not repeated. They don't just edit it again. He sings it a second time. I've got every reason on earth to be mad. You can hear the guitar a little different, but to me, at my ears. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. Where again, that's a little flaw to me in the UK. Even though that's the way they intended it originally, I kind of prefer hearing I'll Cry Instead if I'm going to listen to it. On one of the US, I think the mono version of Something New also has the double verse in it.
You prefer the longer version? The
longer version. It's It's a really short song. And although I do love stereo here and there, I like the mono mix. I think, just my opinion, of that album, because one thing that always gets to me is when they're singing "If I Fell" and Paul's voice cuts out. Yes. That's not. It wasn't bad.
I know. And there's also the harmonica riff on "Should Have Known Better" on the stereo version. Exactly. Yeah.
But you like that from Hey Jude, probably, right?
Either one's fine. I'm not,
because it does that on Hey Jude too.
That's right. Yeah, well, I remember noticing that on the Hey Jude album. For years it was like, why is that different? And that's before I knew anything about the stereo mix versus the mono mix and all that business. And I realized, I found out years later that the Hey Jude album specifically has those songs on it because they were the stereo mixes, had not been released in the States yet. I think those songs had only been issued in mono in the States up until that point. I think I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure, but no, I agree. I think I'll Cry Instead is a really underrated Lennon track in terms of, like, taking this sort of like country blues rockabilly stuff that he loved so much, the Carl Perkins stuff, that get it, George is doing this, like, why am I blanking on Elvis's guitar player, Scotty Moore, right? He's doing that kind of a thing underneath it, but John is using that medium to funnel his actual emotions, these very sort of vulnerable emotions that he's got that that you're not supposed to kind of show as a man in those days, but he's using this sort of very male medium as a channel for that, by writing that song. Got a chip on my shoulders bigger than my feet. I mean, we all, we know his history by now. That's like, takes a lot of balls to pour that kind of stuff into a song like that. So there's a lot more going on than meets the eye initially with some of these things.
I love the lyrics and the attitude in it and stuff.
Yeah, I love I'll Cry Instead because of the mixture of country and western and R&B in there. But you're not alone in your opinion about A Hard Day's Night. I've noticed, and we all do, because we pay a lot of attention to what Beatle fans say in social media, and there's a lot more appreciation, I think, for that album because it just sounds so damn fresh when you listen to it now. There's so much energy in there, and I must admit, because you brought up When I Get Home, it's one of the few Beatles songs that I liked. It was one of my least favorite ones growing up, but I appreciate that song a lot more now because I think it has a really strong R&B feel to it. And also because I really like to study compositions. And once in a while, the Beatles used to do things like they would add an extra bit to a song, which I'm not sure if it was a verse or not, or a bridge. Like, what was it? When I'll get you home tonight, I'm gonna hold. And that's not anywhere else in the rest of the song. Right? So I love that. Just like in I'll Be Back, they added a whole other bit to the song. We haven't mentioned I'll Be Back, which I think is a brilliant song.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great closer.
But maybe it's also a reaction to, the first two albums having covers, and all of a sudden...
I was just going to say, Ken, I personally, I said it earlier, that I think maybe my favorite album would be With the Beatles. I don't know why, but I think that has a lot of this, what John's talking about, a lot of the energy. You seem hungry. But I think a lot of people, I'm not saying it's anybody here, but I think what I hear a lot is from other people, it's got covers. Hard Day's Nights are all originals.
Well, again, to the point of like, what's the criteria for what, are we taking points off for covers? I mean, if that's the criteria where, it's got to only be albums where they wrote everything. Well, then that eliminates Please Please Me. Right. It eliminates Help.
For Sale.
It eliminates Beatles for Sale. Were there covers on Rubber Soul?
Maggie May.
Where's Act Natural? Where's Act Natural?
That's on Help.
Help's on Help. Okay, it's not on Rubber Soul.
No.
I'm jumbling. You know why? Because I'm getting confused because of Yesterday and Today has Act Naturally, but it's also got tracks from Rubber Soul on it.
Right.
And
we should remember that, or I didn't know for a long time, that Yesterday and Today in the States already had and Your Bird Can Sing, Dr. Robert,
Revolver tracks on it.
I'm Only Sleeping. Therefore, it's a jip. Obviously, the UK is a superior Revolver by far, but in the US they already got those tracks.
It's so strange though. We didn't know at the time. I didn't know. I mean, I remember when I've been listening to Revolver literally my whole life. I remember being a little kid. I remember being like 4 or 5 years old, and my father had given me a cassette copy. Do you remember when the cassettes came out?
Yeah.
And it was like the album cover, and then it was like a blue stripe at the bottom with the So I had one of those like Capitol cassettes of Revolver, and then when I got the CD, many years later, when I'm Only Sleeping came on, I said, "What the hell's going on?" It took me, and then when Andrew Bird Can Sing came on, I was like, "What? What's happening?" Because I loved Yesterday and Today as a kid. But I didn't quite. But it's a great sequence of tracks. Whether again, what's your criteria? Are you evaluating it based on like this is the way the band intended it to be when they went into the studio, or are you evaluating a great sequence of tracks? But don't get me started on the American albums. I got a lot of flack. I wrote an article years ago where I had the balls to call Dave Dexter the American Fifth Beatle, and man, did people?
All right.
I got.
Dave Marsh would love you.
Well, yeah, but then I got an email from Dave Dexter's grandson saying like, "Hey man, thanks for acknowledging my my grandfather's work." I mean, let's face it, that's how those of us on this side of the Atlantic, that's how we heard the band.
Yeah.
The Byrds, Tom Petty, all those guys, they were listening to the Beatles on Capitol. So,
Yeah,
Anyway.
which is a whole other discussion, right? I know I'm taking it.
That's your next episode, Ken.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes or no to the U.S. records?
What's it? We gonna say an hour?
Well, it's not just me. Come on, man.
But it's a fascinating thing, this whole going from
I gotta
Rubber
eat.
Revolver for me. And to me, like, it's only since the Beatles CDs came out in 1987 that I feel like Revolver has really gotten the respect that it deserves. And, there's so many factors. And it's hard for me to talk about it because in 1966, I was a little kid. So I loved Revolver, the American album. I didn't notice this tremendous change in the band, but I also thought that maybe because I already had Yesterday and Today, and I had those three other songs, the transition wasn't so sharp, a sharper contrast from Rubber Soul going into Revolver. But then you had the American Rubber Soul too. So
It was a completely different record.
And better.
All right, Dylan.
Next.
I know you're chomping at the bit here.
Yeah. It's a long time.
I really didn't appreciate the stray bullet that Tell Me What You See took there. We can talk about that later.
Hey,
But-
while it could be argued that maybe is one of the, dare I say, filler tracks from the Beatles, any other band would kill that.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Joe.
As one of the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Agreed.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, like you guys have said, there's so many potential choices. And kind of like you, John, I began arguing initially the semantics of what it meant to be the best Beatles album. But at the end of the day, they're all Beatles albums. They all have the Beatles names on it. And my favorite album by them is also the album that I think is the best. And it's my favorite album of all time. And it's Abbey Road. And as with so many of their albums, I could essentially make the argument by reading off the track listing here, which is a testament to the strength of their songwriting. It's not necessarily a John-centric record, but what he does contribute is marvelous. I mean, for a band with so many songs that have stood the test of time, I think it makes perfect sense that Come Together has remained one of their most popular and recognizable songs since it came out. I mean, the lyrics are perfectly abstract in that unmistakably Lennon fashion, and his vocal delivery is equally on brand in its quality. And you've got all-time performances from Paul and Ringo there. Paul's laying down that great electric piano too. Great solo from George. That's a top 10 Beatles song for me. And then I Want You to close out side A. Just a masterclass in juxtaposing these effective minimalist lyrics with this monstrous band performance. It is so well composed, arranged, and performed. I mean, everyone is crushing it instrumentally, including Billy Preston on the organ. Mm-hmm. John's vocals are out of this world good on it. Definitely a precursor to Primal Scream approach. He'd be taken a year later. It's a sonic triumph, and having it rumble all the way to the final groove on side A is, for me, the icing on the top of its sheer coolness. So John's got those songs, plus his contributions to side B. Ringo's got Octopus's Garden, which isn't Beethoven's Fifth, but I think it's a compositional upgrade on Don't Pass Me By. He sings the absolute hell out of it. The band sounds amazing, so I have zero qualms whatsoever with it. Paul, you can look at it in some ways. He's the driving force behind the medley, which I'll get to in a second, but he offers up two very distinct sides of his songwriting on side A. You get the twisted whimsy of Maxwell Silverhammer, which I understand is a love it or hate it song for some people, and I don't know, by process of elimination, it might be my least favorite on the album, but I totally adore it. I think it's so clever. And then Oh Darling is just brilliant. It's a hell of a vocal performance, unbelievable arrangement. And George, I mean, Jesus, I mean, talk about taking advantage of an opportunity. You get 2 songs on a record, and those songs make such a convincing case if anyone wanted to crown him the MVP of the whole album. And Something and Here Comes the Sun. What else can you say? I mean, they're 2 perfect songs, perfect arrangements, perfect performances, easily both of them top 10 Beatles songs for me. Not to mention that George is also responsible for introducing the Moog synthesizer to the band, which works wonders on Because and I Want You and Maxwell. And, you know, shortly thereafter became a staple for an entire genre, prog rock moving forward, but then even in more commercial rock and roll moving forward. So, and then, I mean, as it pertains to side B, again, what can I say that hasn't been said a million times before? I mean, the medley technically, I guess, starts with You Never Give Me Your Money, but I've always perceived Because as the true first song in the medley, mostly because of the way that last chord rings out and resolves into the opening of You Never Give Me Your Money. But this is a collection of songs that some of them can stand extremely well on their own, like You Never Give Me Your Money, which is the 4th song I've mentioned so far that's a top 10 Beatles track for me. Just a brilliant mini suite within itself where everyone's shining instrumentally. You've got Paul not only giving an all-time great vocal performance, but writing some of his most evocative lyrics. And by the time you get to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 coda, it's breathtaking in every way. So you've got songs like that stand perfectly well by themselves. And then you've got tracks like Me, Mr. Mustard, and Polythene Pam, which on their own aren't these staggeringly impressive compositions, but the Beatles had already explored so many different ways up to this point how to blend and incorporate multiple music ideas between writing these multi-part songs, like A Day in the Life or Happiness is a Warm Gun, and then transitioning seamlessly from one track to another, like Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Sgt. Pepper, A Little Help from My Friends. But hearing them expand on it to this level is so impressive. And those songs don't need to be masterpieces in their own right to play a part in creating a larger masterpiece as a whole, especially not when they're so well arranged and performed as they are. And I mean, closing it with Golden Slumbers Carry That Weight at the end. I just, so much emotion across the board. And once again, titanic contributions from everybody involved. If I consider those 3 songs as one, it's right up there with A Day in the Life as my favorite Beatles track. So literally half of my top 10 Beatles songs is made up of material from Abbey Road. It's perfect music. I think it's the greatest music ever recorded. And I've stated on this show before, and I'll double down on it. Abbey Road is Ringo's finest moment as a drummer. See, Come Together, Something, Oh Darling, I Want You, many others. It's George's finest moment as a guitarist. See, You Never Give Me Your Money, Octopus's Garden, I Want You. I think his solo in Something is the greatest guitar solo ever by anyone on any song. And it's Paul's finest moment as a bassist. Come Together, Something, I Want You. I mean, for 3 of the 4 members to have their shining moments as an instrumentalist across an album be on this one album, which doesn't take away from how great they are in every other record. It's just how great it is here. And not only are everybody's lead vocals phenomenal, but the background vocals are as stunning as any other Beatles record. I haven't even mentioned how incredible the vocal arrangements are on Because and Sun King. You know, Paul's harmony on Something is so crucial. John's voice being as prominent as it is at the end of You Never Give Me Your Money is such an asset. And Ringo shining as much as he is on Carry That Weight. He so rarely played that big a role when it came to being a background vocalist or a group vocalist, but the timbre of his voice fits so perfectly for that song, plays so much into the emotionalism of that song. So you put all these elements together with some of the strongest songwriting from 3 of the greatest songwriters of all time and immaculate production. I think it's one of the greatest sounding albums ever. So props to Jeff Emmerich, Phil McDonald, your buddy Alan Parsons, and of course, George Martin, who also wrote amazing orchestral parts on this record. Like I said, incredible emotionalism with all the right dashes of humor and lightheartedness that I think are so crucial to the Beatles' music and overall presence, including what I think is a brilliant idea to keep Her Majesty at the end. I don't believe it takes away from the majesty of the medley. I think it simply serves as this funny little Easter egg that reminds you that despite all of this musical and personal growth, there's still these four cheeky guys from Liverpool underneath it all. And it's a perfect album. I've heard it God knows how many hundreds of times, and I'm still not sick of it. Pound for pound, I think it's their best. And I think it's the greatest album of all time. So therefore,
when they announced the Abbey Road box set, I was like, this is like the album that doesn't need any touch-up whatsoever.
Tom, I said the same thing. I wrote a review of the box set, and I said this album is its own deluxe edition already.
Right.
You don't need a deluxe, even though I love the deluxe edition.
Yeah,
they did a great job with it, but they didn't need to do anything.
Exactly, they didn't need anything.
I actually like the what I call the more doo-wop feeling to "Oh Darling." I heard the background vocals to me, harmonies, whatever, to me stood out more. That's one thing I liked about it. And I'll say quickly, you were mentioning Billy Preston, Dylan. I got to tell you, boy, I always say this. I freaked out incredibly in a positive way when I heard the outtake, and you heard Billy Preston on that organ whirling away. I wish they would have used that, him go crazy more in the finished version.
Yeah.
It's still there though, and it's still pretty wild.
Oh yeah.
Also, his organ blending with the strings on something is nothing short of miraculous. It's just a sonic triumph in every way. It's a compositional triumph. It's an instrumental triumph. I can't say a single bad thing about it.
And the perfect as a last album. I mean, if it's to be the last album, you're not thinking to let it be.
It kind of takes a lot of the things we were saying too about the White Album, the diversity, having everyone be involved with it, and it does kind of condense it a little more, which not a knock on the White Album, but I don't know.
A lot of great goosebump moments, I think, throughout that album too, where you just, the back of the hair on the back of your neck just stands up. I mean, listening to Once There Was a Way, I mean, it's just for me. And then, and in the end, it's just chilling, looking back at it now, knowing what we know now, it's just makes it that more powerful.
Yeah.
You always have
I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Ken.
You have to wonder if they really knew at the time that it would be their last album, because we do know they had a meeting in September discussing the follow-up album to Abbey Road. And I've heard Ringo say, we didn't go into each song thinking this is our last song or whatever. And then a few years ago, he said, we kind of knew it was our last album.
They might have had an inkling.
When you're writing a song like "And in the End,"
right,
and hearing Golden Slumbers and just the mood of that song, it makes you think like they did know, but then who knows if they really were thinking that at that moment.
I mean, that's what life is like, though. I mean, when you look back on events in your life and you think, oh, that was the last, date that she and I went on before we broke up or whatever, you're not thinking at the time, but you kind of like, is this going to be, who knows? We can speculate all we want. None of us are going to know what it was like to be the four of them wrestling with this business entity that they had to somehow come to grips with. And the record making was sort of like, that's the sort of like the goose that lays the golden eggs, is us making Beatles records, right? We can have all the clothing shops and film companies that we want, but ultimately, do we really want to keep, the four of us getting together once a year to crank out a Beatle product? There is a Lennon interview. There's a filmed Lennon interview where he talks to somebody about that. Abbey Road's in the can, and I'm not sure if it's out yet. And the guy asks him, how long do you think you can go on be a practicing Beatle? Right? And John gives this really long answer. It gets to the point where it's like, now there's three. He says, in the old days, Paul and I would just crank out 12 songs and make a record. Now there's three of us writing all the time, trying to squeeze it on an album. and it gets to the point where whatever we do, if we put the name Beatles on it, it sells. He's like, I'm not on half the tracks on Abbey Road. You know, they were getting to that point where it was gonna become like, you know, name the band that like assembles periodically and puts out a record that's like, buddy of mine just saw the Chili Peppers at Giant Stadium, and he said, oh, they were killing it. And he's like, I said, did they do anything off the new album? He said, yeah, it was equal amounts. I said, what does the new album sound like? He goes, yeah, it sounds like a Chili Peppers record. You know, they get together and everybody does their thing that sounds like the Chili Peppers, and it's fine, and it's great. I don't think the Beatles were going to do that.
Right.
To the point of mission statement. I don't think that was their thing, to just kind of like periodically crank out a product, you know. So when it was getting to the point where it was going to have to be like that, that's when they said, you know, no way. But Dylan, I'm glad you mentioned the bass playing, because I've done my first McCartney bass clinic. I focused on the bass lines on Abbey Road, and I spent quite a lot of time pulling isolated tracks off the web and making the play along tracks. So I spent a lot of time listening to Abbey Road with headphones, and you listen to something with headphones, and it's like taking a warm bath. I mean, it's just like sonically everything that it really is like, you know, somewhere in a smile she goes. Boop, 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 boop. I mean, everybody's responding to each other, everybody's playing off of each other. The group interplay is just like astounding, and I think that brings up a really interesting point about the production on this record. I believe they moved to a solid state board for this one. So there's also not just with the mixing board, but the approach to record making and the craft of rock albums in the studio. I submit that without Abbey Road, I think Abbey Road set the stage and like sort of raised the bar in terms of like what rock bands were expected to do in the studio. I think Hotel California, Rumors, I think you know,
Dark Side of the Moon.
I think Dark Side of the Moon. I'm thinking of Supertramp, 10cc, all of those bands in the 70s that were really using the recording studio as their instrument. Take a cue from the way Abbey Road is crafted. I think when you have these records where it's like every single all the songwriting is 100% structurally sound, but also the arrangements and the craft and the care that's taken to make sure that nothing gets in the way of anything else. I heard some story that when they did Hotel California, they hit like one drum at a time. Or, you know, you hear all these crazy stories about in the studio about how they, you know, like how Steely Dan recorded the Asia album like 7 times with like a different rhythm section on every track, and they picked the best one. That sort of like, you know, very sort of careful crafting in the studio started, I think, with Abbey Road. So
which is funny because when you listen to a lot of the isolated tracks, especially even their background vocals, you can still hear the imperfections in there.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing about the Beatles, is that they were as perfect as they were supposed to be, you know. And you know, that's not to take away from anything that any other group has done or any other innovations that have been made, but that's why there's a human element to the Beatles that, you know, a lot of other bands I think lack for me. But yeah, but I also know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, speaking of that too, I mean, the fact that, you know, the stress that was involved with running Apple and the fraction, including Alan Klein, and the fact that they're helping their other Apple artists, and then yet they come up and create arguably their best album, is still mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I don't think they would have been able to sustain, you know, being talent scouts and doing all these extra sort of like outside things and being, you know, being the Beatles at the same time. I think at some point that it was just sort of like, all right, something's got to give here, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned mind-blowing. There's so many aspects of the Beatles' career, mind-blowing. But you know, when I think about side 2 of Abbey Road and the medley, most of those songs were not conceived together, and the fact that they flow so well together as one, you'd think that they were written all together that way. So, Dylan, I know that you're going to have to leave us because you I'm sorry.
I mean, not this world, just
no.
this
Just
chat.
but if you need to go, it's been great having you on this show, and obviously, you're welcome back anytime you want, and your insights are amazing here, and as are all of you. On this.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saving me for last so I could win the argument with the right choice.
I never said.
Oh, that's true Dylan fashion right there.
Wait a minute, I know yours.
That's true. I'm so sorry. I unfortunately am on a time crunch and have to jump off here. But are you going to give yours, Ken? Because I'm going to watch this back anyway.
Like
but
I
now
said,
I really have to.
To Joe, it's hard for me to add anything to what he said about the White Album. But
that's what I figured he might have said.
I'm just someone who's very impressed with any artist who can do almost anything. And I like artists who are as versatile, diverse as possible, that can tackle any musical genre. And the Beatles did just that. I think the White Album is the most diverse album that any single artist or group has ever done. And it isn't just the fact that it's all over the place musically. I do think that the songs are very good. Most of them are good to great, like the whole Beatles catalog is for me. And they went to the full extremes on the White Album. Like I said, Helter Skelter and Honey Pie. You couldn't find two different songs that could be any more different. But someone like McCartney in particular, who I admire so much through his solo career, continuing on that pattern and exploring so many different musical styles, that's one of the many reasons why I admire him and the band. The Beatles didn't want to repeat themselves, which is another thing that we kind of alluded to just a few minutes ago. But they didn't want to make another Sgt. Pepper at that moment, and they wanted to have a more stripped down sound, with the exception of adding strings on Goodnight, or a few examples like harpsichord on Piggies or something like that. But musically, they were all over the place on the White Album, and I love them for that reason. And all the songs are strong. And it's like you were saying, 4 George Harrison songs on there. While My Guitar Gently Weeps is one of his best compositions during those days. And I love the lesser known songs, the ones that are now getting appreciated a bit more, like Long, Long, Long. I love the fact that you go from a transition like Helter Skelter, so loud, into the very quiet beginning of Long, Long, Long there. That must have
Perfect.
been, but yeah, I mean, for reasons like those, I just think the Beatles went as far as you can go when it came to exploring different musical styles. And you can make a case in point for every Beatles album. And we just hit upon a few of them here, but we did it all so well, and that's the beauty of the catalog. I'm sure somebody will say With the Beatles is the best album. Yeah, it's one person wrote to one of our shows and said how much he appreciates Beatles for Sale now more than ever before. So,
I love Beatles.
Hey, who knows?
It's so interesting, and of course, isn't it fascinating? We pretty much, aside from you and I, Ken, covered.
I love when that happens. I love when that happens.
Yeah.
We didn't check with each other. Nobody knew what the other person was going to say.
Before I run, the only other thing I have to say is that the crazy thing is, if you really look at this album cover, so look at this license plate, LMW, Linda McCartney Weeps. Now let's unpack this a little bit. No, I'm kidding.
And it's the wrong number anyway for Paul, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Wrong age.
28. Now see, he has his other foot forward, where the other guys have
They're out of step. Right.
And
luckily, we have all those different walking shots now.
And he's barefoot because he's dead.
I saw
corpses don't wear shoes. Show me a corpse with shoes.
I saw a BBC News report on the crossing, and the cab drivers who have to go through, and they followed this. The news crew followed this poor English cab driver for like a day, and every time he comes, he's like, every bloody time there's someone walking in, go on, take your picture, yeah, come on, get out of the way, and how fed up the English cab drivers are with having to, pass like all these people like walking in the thing.
Hopefully they'll get fed up with me one day.
Have you been there?
Not yet. I hope to.
I haven't been there. Although I pushed my way into is it St. John's Church where they did the what's the name of the church where the Quarrymen played?
Where John and Paul met?
Yeah. Great to meet
It's
you,
been a
Dylan.
pleasure, guys.
Thanks,
Take care, buddy.
Good
Okay,
to
Dylan.
See you,
Take
Dylan.
care.
Right. I keep forgetting. Is it
Jeez,
called
I know it. God, oh, jeez. These things are on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
St. John's Church, St. James Church? It was the church. It's the room where the church where they met when the Quarrymen were playing. And okay, so I'm on one of these official Beatles Liverpool tours, and we get up to the building, and I'm like, "Can we go inside?" And the tour guide said, "Well, unfortunately, no, we can't. It's not open to the public. It's a functioning show." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So we're outside looking at the plaque that they've put up, and a door opens, and this man pushing chairs on a cart comes out, and I start to kind of just like slowly move toward the open door, because I've like snuck backstage enough times to know how to kind of push my way in. And the tour guide, this woman, Jackie Spencer, when you go to Liverpool, get the tour with Jackie Spencer. She's amazing. And she says to the guy, "Would you mind if," and she's a Liverpudlian, right? So thank you. St. Peter's. So, and she's a Liverpudlian. So speak to the guy. She goes, "Would you mind terribly if he took a look inside? He's come all the way from America, from New York City." And this old man looks at me and goes, "There's nothing to see in there."
Really?
He's so fed up with these guys, these Americans with their T-shirts. Who can I see the room?
He's probably heard that a million times. Oh, they've come all the way from New York City.
He's come all the way. Exactly. But so whatever. So I walked in and I saw and it looked at once like an ordinary like church basement room, but it was I could definitely like feel, I don't know if it was my imagination, but it just definitely felt like, holy shit, this is like there he stood over there playing 20 Flight Rock and knowing all the words or what it was
smell beer over your shoulder. Maybe.
I know that my wife went to England on one of Charles Rosenay's trips in the early 90s, and she went to the Casbah Club, and some of the things were removed there from those old days. And my wife was bringing it up to one of the brothers, it might have been Rogue, and he said to her, "Oh, you Americans, you're so sentimental. You don't seem to have an appreciation for the historical value of certain things."
Yeah, it's an interesting thing over there. I mean, when I asked Jackie, "How did you get into this?" and she says, "Well, I'm from Liverpool, and when you're from Liverpool, the Beatles are just a part of your life, whether you like it or not." But she's a Liverpool expert first, and that was the big takeaway for me. I was expecting to go to Liverpool to get some Beatles mojo, and what I found was the Beatles have Liverpool mojo. There is a vibe in that city. My friend Roseanne, Roseanne Beluso, Fans on the Run?
Don't think so.
Okay, so she described it to me. She goes, "John, it's like the Brooklyn of England, right? Working class, salty. Everybody is naturally funny. We did the National Trust, excuse me. We did the tours of John and Paul's homes, and the guy who drove the van, he overheard some guys talking in like a foreign language. And he goes, "Listen, if you've got any questions for me, I don't speak Spanish, so you're going to be waiting long for an answer." And these guys go, "Well, we are not Spanish. We are Norwegian." And the driver goes, "You'll be waiting even longer then." Right? And I just thought like that sounds like the dialogue in A Hard Day's Night. Like that quick kind of, and then I realized, this is the thing that they had. That Ringo had, that they all, that salty kind of, and to see, like, we took the bus from the city center where the cavern is to John and Paul's houses, and it's like it's a forever bus ride. And so the woman is showing off McCartney's childhood home, and I gotta ask a question. This may seem like a ridiculous question. How did they get from here to the cavern? Because we've just spent and she goes, well, they took the bus. They used to get on. It was like 2 or 3 buses that they used to have to take with all their instruments. And it really brought their story to life, like to see the actual streets that they were on and the trips that they had to make. It really kind of gave an insight to their character. I mean, to Dylan's point about the side 2 of Abbey Road, all those, Polythene Pam, Mr. Mustard, that's very sort of Liverpudlian, like poetic literature stuff. I highly recommend do 2 days in Liverpool and do Jackie Spencer's tour.
It's on my bucket list.
Oh yeah, spend the money. Don't wait. Don't
Well, I don't have the money.
That didn't stop me.
Right. No, I can't wait, and I love to hear people's experiences when they go, because it just makes me want to go even more.
I want to run down the Hard Day's Night Street at the beginning of Hard Day's Night. Caitlin Larkin did that.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
I only went to England once, but I made the mistake of centering more on London than Liverpool. If I ever go back there again, which I will, I want to spend at least a whole week in Liverpool and just absorb the culture and the people.
It's also a great, besides all the Beatles stuff, it's just a cool city, on its own. I asked my wife, I said, what does this remind you? Does it remind you of New York? Does it feel like Paris? What does it feel like? She goes, this place has its own vibe. Liverpool totally has its own vibe that has evolved, obviously, a lot from what it must have been like in the 50s. But it's still, like New York City, like Brooklyn, still feels, for all the changes that our city has gone through, there's still like an essential character to it, and it being right by the sea, by the Mersey, the river over there. It's a fascinating place, and it really kind of, for as much as we all know about this group, there's like a whole other dimension to their story and their sensibility that you get a great sense of just by being there.
Well, I can't wait till that day comes when I return to Liverpool. Be great if I can get everybody from all my podcast shows here.
That would be a trip.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote a story on it. For Culture Sonar. So all of my every dollar I spent there I was able to write off as a business expense.
Oh, very cool.
I thought of that on the way home. I'm like, wait a second, if I write an article, I can. So
anyway. My YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I might record everything for business expense.
Dude, I'm telling you.
Anyway.
Great ideas. The wheels are turning, Joe. The wheels are turning.
That's it.
At all times.
Cool. Very cool.
Guys, this has been
okay.
You all added so much with your opinions about what you think is the Beatles' best album. Sometime in the near future, I'll get a whole bunch of other people, and they'll be giving us different albums with their for it.
I'm surprised nobody picked Rubber Soul, but I'm not. I don't want it to go on and on. I gotta get 2 hours late. But they were supposed to eat dinner when we started.
I know.
I'll be curious if anyone will come up with Sgt. Pepper, because none of us did.
Yeah, that's Pepper. I feel bad about the way it's kind of getting like shoved away these days. We'll talk about that another time.
We don't know in the future how people will look at this stuff. So anyway, thanks so much, guys, and thanks to all of you for watching. Subscribe to all of our channels, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Take
Ken.
care.
Thanks for having me. And see you guys.